Welcome to the Fear and Greed Daily Interview. I'm Adam Lang. In recent months, there's been a fascinating case playing out in the federal court, and it's something that every person in business in Australia should be aware of. It involves a family-owned business from the Victorian town of Mildura called Country Care. Country Care makes healthcare equipment, things like walking frames and bathroom aids. What makes Country Care so fascinating is that the ACCC, the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission, alleged they were operating as a cartel, attempting to fix prices for healthcare equipment with businesses across the country. Earlier this month, the ACCC lost the case, a significant defeat in Australia's first cartel prosecution before a jury. Dr Mel Marquis is a senior lecturer at Monash Law School. He watched this case closely and has written about the impact it'll have on future cartel prosecutions in Australia. Dr Marquis, welcome to Fear and Greed.
Hello, Adam. Great to talk to you.
Mel, first, let's start with the basics. What is a cartel?
A cartel is an agreement between competitors which reduces or eliminates competition between them, and it can take the form of some classic variations on the cartel theme, beginning with price-fixing cartels. That's probably the number one classic instance. But there are other ways for competitors to reduce or eliminate competition. They can agree to restrict output between them, for example, limiting supply, essentially. They can agree to allocate markets between them. That could consist of allocating customers or sources of supply or territories. All of those would be regarded as cartel conduct. And then another prominent form of cartel behavior would be bid rigging cartels. And bid rigging can take place, on the one hand, in the private sector, simply suppliers, for example, manipulating bids for contracts with a private sector counterparty, or perhaps the most prominent example of all would be public procurement, where it's actually the government or a branch of the government that is putting a contract out to tender, and competitors collude on that tender and effectively manipulate the price.
So it can be pretty clever and cunning, but in essence, it's a way of suppliers attempting to distort the market in their favour. Is that basically right?
You're quite right. It could be suppliers colluding to manipulate their relations with customers, or you could also imagine, let's say, powerful retailers that collude in order to exploit suppliers upstream. So it can work either way.
Right. So what was the ACCC's case against Country Care?
It was alleged, and as you mentioned in the beginning, the ACCC, as well as the Commonwealth Director of Public Prosecutions, lost this case early this month. But the ACCC and the prosecutor alleged that the managing director of this business, Country Care, a certain Mr. Hogan, had attempted to get a number of retailers. It appears that there were 43 different retailers involved, to get them to avoid advertising prices at a level below the price at which Country Care had a contract with the Department of Veterans Affairs. Now, the motivation there, according to the ACCC and the prosecutor, was to avoid the risk that the Department of Veterans Affairs would catch wind of those lower prices and seek to renegotiate the contract price. And so that was the gist of the allegation against Country Care.
Okay. So, Mel, Country Care doesn't seem like a big company with a lot of influence. Why did the ACCC lose in court?
Right. So losing the case here, you're quite right to raise the question, but putting one's finger on the exact reason is difficult because this was a jury trial. Jury deliberations in criminal cases are secret. We can speculate a little bit. I'd like to know whether this is a fundamental warning sign to the regulators, the ACCC and the prosecutor, to the effect that perhaps juries in Australia are not ready to treat this type of behavior as criminal conduct that rises to the level of egregiousness that would justify very severe penalties, including jail time for individuals. Now, that's one question that is an open question, And I think we won't really know the answer until we begin to see patterns of conduct on the parts of a significant number of juries. So that's one thing that I'd like to know, but in a slightly different vein and a somewhat more mundane vein. The jury in this case could have simply been persuaded by the defense in the case. The defense, part of the job of a criminal defense lawyer is to, let's say, throw mud on the evidence that is produced by the prosecutor. And in this case, the criminal defense lawyer did their best to attack the credibility of the witnesses for the prosecution. So that may have been an important factor in this case as well. An issue that comes up in many criminal cases is that the criminal conduct, if it was originally concealed from the authorities, it may have been exposed by a participant in the illegal conduct. And the reason that these parties come forward to the regulator or to the prosecutor is to secure immunity from sanctions and prosecution. That did happen in this case, and this too could have played a role in the perception of the jury as to the credibility of the witness for the prosecution.
So from the outside looking in, it does seem like a cliched David and Goliath type battle. Is it unusual for the ACCC to target a family-run business like this?
I think in the abstract, it's difficult to make a judgment about that because I take your point, absolutely. But the fact is, different family-run businesses involved in different cases might be perceived by the ACCC in different ways. In this case, for example, if you think about it, you've got consumers that belonged to vulnerable groups.
Yes.
That certainly could have been a factor. I would venture to say that it probably was a factor for the ACCC in investigating this case, and it may well have been a factor for the CDPP in prosecuting the case. In addition, with regard to the Country Care case, recall that it was alleged, but not proved, that the managing director in this case, together with another employee at the time, had sought to induce a rather large number of retailers, 43 retailers it was alleged, to engage in the allegedly illegal collusion. And in a sense, you can see how that brings the scale of the conduct to a greater level. It multiplies, in a sense, the scale of the conduct in question. And that too could well have been a factor from the point of view of the ACCC.
I see. So my understanding of this case is that those 43 suppliers, if you will, were joined up to supply different geographical areas and make trading with a government entity more practicable. So you can see how the intent on the Country Care side was reasonable, but I'm sure, as you say, with the market being potentially vulnerable people, that the ACCC was looking to protect those who might have been preyed upon in this instance.
Yes, and regulators sometimes also make a deliberate decision to bring cases against smaller entities in the hope of sending messages, educating the public, and demonstrating that in spite of the small size of an entity, there is no inherent protection against the application of the Competition and Consumer Act. Now, that's not to say that a regulator would go after small businesses in a systematic way, but regulators both in and outside of Australia do like to maintain that they like to rattle the sword a little bit so that even smaller entities make proportionate investments in compliance with the law.
Okay, stay with me, Dr. Marquis. We'll be back in a minute. My guest this morning is Dr Mel Marquis, Senior Lecturer at Monash Law School. So what other examples of cartels have we seen previously in Australia?
Let's just go back to the cardboard box cartel case from 2007, or that's when the federal court ordered VZ Paper to pay a financial penalty of $36 million. That case was brought as a civil matter, not a criminal matter, by the ACCC. And that is, until 2009, that was the only possibility in Australia. But that VZ Paper case is also important because at the same time, there was some private litigation that was pursued on the part of more than 4,000 consumers in Australia. So it was a class action lawsuit. It resulted ultimately in a settlement in 2011 that was accepted by the federal court. And the terms of that settlement were significant. It led to the payment by two companies, VZ Paper and Amcor, the payment of a total of $120 million. And of that figure, $95 million was damages. And although class action litigation in Australia in cartel cases has been surprisingly rare, I have to say, the VZ Paper case at least illustrates that it is possible to bring and to actually secure settlements in a case like that. I expect that in the next decade, we may well see a few more of those types of actions. Just to mention a couple more, in 2018, the appeals came to a conclusion in a case involving a Japanese company called Yazaki. Now, Yazaki is a producer of so-called wire harnesses, and those wire harnesses are incorporated in vehicles, and they allow the vehicle to function electronically. And Yazaki, the Japanese company, as well as its Australian subsidiary, had engaged in collusive conduct that led to Toyota paying too much for those parts. And of course, once a company like Toyota pays too much, then of course the overcharge is passed on to customers, consumers here in Australia. So that led to a financial penalty on Yazaki of $46 million. Again, that was a civil case. And then the final cartel case that I would mention here would be the global shipping cartel case. It actually divided into three different cases against a couple of Japanese companies again, and a Norwegian shipping company. And the item that was being shipped was vehicles. And between 2017 and 2021, those cases resulted in guilty pleas to the prosecutor. So these were not contested cartels the way the Country Care case was. These cases involved companies that were willing to enter guilty pleas and then to cooperate with the authorities, the ACCC and the prosecutor, thereby securing for themselves a substantial reduction in the fines that they ultimately had to pay. And the total amount of the fines in those three cases was about $83 million.
Wow. So the penalties are severe and the companies involved can be high profile or indeed small companies. Are there lessons in this for businesses around the country?
What we see is a significant ramping up of, on the one hand, the penalties, and on the other hand, the willingness of the ACCC and the prosecutor to bring criminal prosecutions. Now, that ramping up is something to take note of. And business entities, there's no cause for panic, but I do think that it underscores the need for companies to start thinking about, if they haven't been thinking already, about compliance with the Australian cartel laws. Compliance would certainly include assessments of a company's risk profile. Of course, that risk profile is going to differ depending on a variety of different factors, but businesses are well advised to start engaging in that exercise and to take appropriate action, whether it's company training, proper messaging within an organization, and certainly an important factor when it comes to compliance with the law is to make sure that the message is coming from the tip top of the organization.
Got it. Those are good tips. Dr Mel Marquis, thank you so much for talking to Fear and Greed this morning.
Adam, thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it.
That was Dr Mel Marquis, Senior Lecturer at Monash Law School. This is the Fear and Greed Daily Interview. Join Sean Aylmer every morning for the full Fear and Greed podcast with all the business news you need to know. I'm Adam Lang. Enjoy your day.